The night Linda Carter disappeared from her own anniversary dinner, her family finally learned the difference between having a mother and using one. At 6:47 on a Saturday evening in a quiet suburban home outside Columbus, Ohio, the Carter house looked perfect from the street. Warm porch lights glowed against the early fall darkness. Two cars were lined neatly in the driveway, and through the front windows anyone passing by could see silver balloons tied to the dining room chairs for Richard and Linda Carter's 30th wedding anniversary. Inside, the table had already been set with white plates, folded napkins, polished glasses, and a centerpiece of pale yellow roses that Linda had bought herself that morning with a coupon from the grocery store. The roast chicken was resting in the oven. The green bean casserole was covered in foil. The mashed potatoes were still warm, and a cherry pie sat cooling beside the sink. Everything was ready, except for the one person who had made it all happen. Linda was gone. At first, nobody noticed. Richard Carter stood in the living room adjusting his tie and checking his phone, annoyed that the ice bucket had not been filled yet. Their son Jason walked in with his wife Megan and their two kids, asking where the juice boxes were. Emily Carter, Linda's 27-year-old daughter, swept through the kitchen in a navy dress, frowning at a small water spot on the counter as if it had personally offended her. She called out, "Mom, where are the serving spoons?" No answer came back. She rolled her eyes and opened a drawer herself, muttering that nothing was ever where it should be. Richard called from the dining room. "Linda, guest will be here any minute. Can you bring out the appetizers?" Still nothing. Megan peeked toward the hallway and said maybe Linda was changing clothes, though nobody remembered seeing her wear anything that day except the faded blue apron she always used for big family meals. Then little Sophie, Jason's 6-year-old daughter, pointed at the kitchen island and asked why Grandma's apron was sitting there like a present. Everyone turned. The apron was folded with strange care, as if it belonged in a drawer instead of around Linda's waist. On top of it was a single piece of paper, torn from the grocery list pad near the refrigerator. Emily picked it up first, expecting a reminder about the rolls or the salad dressing. But when she read the words, her face changed. Richard took 2 steps closer. Jason stopped opening the fridge. Megan went quiet. The note said, "Dinner is in the fridge. For once, serve yourselves." For several seconds, no one moved. The house, which had always seemed to run on Linda's footsteps, suddenly felt too large and too silent. The oven timer beeped once, sharp and lonely. Richard frowned like he had been inconvenienced, but beneath his irritation was something less familiar, something almost like fear. Emily read the note again, slower this time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something easier to understand. But they did not. Linda Carter, the woman who never left dishes in the sink, never forgot a birthday, never sat down until everyone else had eaten, had walked out of her own celebration without asking permission, without raising her voice, and without making sure they were comfortable first. That morning had begun the way most mornings began for Linda Carter, long before anyone else in the house thought about getting up. At 5:08, while the neighborhood outside was still dark and quiet, Linda was already standing in the kitchen in her slippers, tying the faded blue apron around her waist and reaching for the coffee filters. The anniversary dinner was not supposed to be difficult. At least that was what Richard had said the night before when he glanced up from the television and told her to keep it simple. But simple, in the Carter house, still meant feeding 12 people, cleaning every room guests might see, washing the good tablecloth, polishing the silverware, picking up prescriptions, wrapping a gift for Richard's sister, and making sure Jason's children had something they would actually eat. Linda moved through the kitchen with practiced silence, measuring coffee, peeling potatoes, checking the chicken she had seasoned overnight, and writing a list on the little pad by the refrigerator. By 6:30, Richard walked in wearing his robe and did not say happy anniversary. He only looked at the empty mug beside the coffee maker and asked, "Is the coffee ready yet?" Linda poured it for him, added the splash of half and half he liked, and set it near his newspaper. He took it without looking up. At 7:15, Jason called from across town asking if she still had time to iron his white shirt because Megan had forgotten the dinner was semi-formal. Linda said yes before he even finished explaining. At 8 o'clock, Emily came through the back door carrying a garment bag and a phone pressed to her ear, already frustrated about the party flowers. She kissed the air near Linda's cheek, not quite touching her, then said, "Mom, please tell me you did not buy grocery store roses." Linda looked at the pale yellow flowers on the counter and said quietly that they were fresh and pretty. Emily sighed, as if prettiness was not enough, and told her she should have ordered something nicer for such an important night. Linda did not mention that nobody else had offered to buy flowers at all. She simply trimmed the stems and placed them in water. By noon, the washing machine was running, the vacuum cleaner was humming, and Linda had already driven 6 miles to pick up the anniversary cake that Emily had chosen but forgotten to pay for. When she returned, Megan was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling on her phone while her children chased each other around the living room. "You are so good with them," Megan said, smiling without standing up. "Could you keep an eye on them while I rest for a few minutes?" Linda looked at the dishes in the sink, the groceries still in bags, and the chicken waiting for the oven, then nodded. Nobody asked whether she was tired. Nobody asked whether she wanted to get ready for her own anniversary. They all moved around her as if she were part of the house itself, like the stove, the sink, or the washing machine, always there, always useful, and never expected to need anything in return. By late afternoon, the Carter house looked like the kind of home Emily wanted people to admire. The floors shined. The dining room smelled faintly of lemon polish. The good dishes were stacked beside the stove, and the yellow roses Linda had bought at the grocery store somehow looked softer and more elegant once she arranged them with sprigs of greenery from the backyard. Linda had not sat down since breakfast. Her feet ached inside her flat shoes. Her lower back felt stiff from bending over laundry baskets and kitchen cabinets, and her hands smelled of dish soap, onions, and vanilla from the cake she had carefully touched. Up after the frosting shifted in the car. At 4:35, Emily appeared in the kitchen wearing her navy dress, pearl earrings, and the sharp smile she saved for company. She looked around the room, not at Linda, but at the room, as if inspecting a hotel before important guests arrived. "The kitchen looks better," she said, which was the closest thing to praise Linda had received all day. Linda smiled gently and asked if Emily wanted to help place the appetizers on the tray. Emily glanced at the tray, then at Linda's apron, then at a small streak of flour near Linda's wrist. Her expression tightened. "Actually, Mom, maybe you should stay in the kitchen until everyone settles in," she said quietly. Linda looked up, not sure she had heard correctly. Emily lowered her voice even more, as though kindness could be created by whispering something unkind. "It is just that people are dressed up tonight, and you still look like you have been working all day." Linda looked down at herself. Her blouse was clean but plain, her hair was pulled into a loose bun, and the blue apron covered the front of her black slacks. She had planned to change after the chicken came out of the oven, after the rolls warmed, after she filled the water glasses, after she made sure Richard's sister had the seat away from the air vent, because she always complained about being cold. There was always one more thing before Linda was allowed to become a guest in her own home. "I can change in a few minutes," Linda said softly. Emily gave a quick laugh that did not sound cruel enough to be obvious, but not warm enough to be innocent. "Mom, there is no time. Just help with the food first, okay? You are better at making sure things run smoothly." Before Linda could answer, the doorbell rang. Emily's face brightened instantly. She swept out of the kitchen and welcomed the first guests with a voice full of charm, calling them beautiful, hugging them, laughing as if the whole evening had floated together by magic. Linda stood near the stove, listening to compliments drift from the entryway. Everyone loved the flowers. Everyone loved the smell of dinner. Everyone loved how cozy the house felt. Emily accepted each compliment with a graceful thank you, never once turning toward the kitchen. Linda picked up the appetizer tray with both hands and carried it into the dining room. Conversations continued around her, over her, past her. Richard took a stuffed mushroom from the tray and said, "Linda, make sure there are enough napkins in the living room." Jason leaned close and asked if she had remembered the juice boxes. Megan asked whether the children could eat early because they were getting restless. Linda nodded to each request. Then Emily stepped beside her, still smiling at the guests, and gently took the tray from Linda's hands. For one hopeful second, Linda thought her daughter was going to invite her to sit down. Instead, Emily leaned close and whispered, "Mom, maybe use the side door when you bring the next dishes out. It keeps the flow nicer." Linda's smile stayed on her face because guests were watching, but something behind it began to give way. She turned back toward the kitchen, passing the dining table where her own anniversary place card had never been written, and for the first time that day, she wondered whether anyone in that house remembered the celebration was supposed to belong to her too. The first hour of the dinner passed with Linda moving in and out of the kitchen like a shadow that everyone depended on, but no one truly saw. She carried warm rolls to the table, refilled water glasses, replaced forks that the children dropped, checked the chicken, stirred the gravy, sliced the pie, and smiled whenever someone looked in her direction long enough to need something. In the dining room, Richard sat at the head of the table, telling an old story about the year he and Linda bought their first house. But even then he made himself the hero of it. He talked about signing papers, working overtime, and building a life from nothing. He did not mention that Linda had packed every box, painted the nursery, stretched every grocery dollar, and worked part-time at the school office while raising 2 children. Guests nodded and laughed. Emily sat beside her father, glowing under the attention, correcting small details, and adding charming comments, as if she were hosting a polished family event. Linda stood near the kitchen doorway with a pitcher in her hand, listening to her own life being described as though she had only been standing nearby for 30 years. When Richard finally lifted his glass for a toast, Linda felt a small, hopeful ache in her chest. Maybe now he would call her over. Maybe now he would thank her. Maybe now someone would remember that 30 years of marriage had not been held together by one man's paycheck alone. Richard smiled at the table and said, "To family, to hard work, and to having a wife who knows how to keep a home running." The guests chuckled kindly, and a few raised their glasses. It was not meant to sound cruel. That almost made it worse. Linda lowered her eyes and stepped back into the kitchen before anyone could notice how still she had become. A few minutes later, Emily rushed in, her smile gone. "Mom, the gravy is getting too thick," she whispered sharply. Linda reached for the saucepan and added a little broth, stirring until it smoothed out again. Emily watched over her shoulder, tense and impatient. "Please do not mess this up. Everyone is finally having a nice time." Linda looked at her daughter, and for a moment she saw the little girl who used to climb onto the counter and lick frosting from a spoon. She wanted to say that she had been trying to make everyone have a nice time all day. Instead, she only nodded and carried the gravy boat out herself. As she passed behind Emily's chair, Emily turned quickly to answer a guest's question, and her elbow bumped Linda's hand. A thin line of gravy slipped over the edge of the dish and landed on the white tablecloth near Emily's place setting. The room went quiet for half a second, just long enough for shame to find its target. Emily's face flushed. "Mom," she said, forcing a laugh that made the guests look more closely. "This is why I told you to be careful." Linda froze with the gravy boat in both hands. Richard sighed, not loudly, but loudly enough. Jason leaned back and said with a small smile, "Mom is used to kitchen disasters. She will fix it." A few people gave uncomfortable little laughs, the kind people use when they do not want to choose sides. Megan looked down at her plate. Nobody said it had been an accident. Nobody said Emily had moved into Linda's path. Nobody said that Linda had been carrying the entire evening on tired feet while everyone else sat comfortably under the warm light. Linda set the gravy boat down, picked up a cloth napkin, and began dabbing the stain. Emily bent close and whispered, "Can you please not embarrass me tonight?" The words were quiet, but they reached Linda more clearly than any shout could have. She looked at the table, at Richard's untouched second glass of wine, at Jason's easy grin, at Megan's silence, at the empty chair where she should have been sitting. Then Linda slowly folded the stained napkin in her hand. Something inside her did not break loudly. It simply stopped asking to be loved by people who only noticed her when she failed to serve them perfectly. Linda did not say another word at the table. She did not explain herself, did not defend herself, and did not look around the room hoping someone would finally understand. She simply finished dabbing the gravy from the tablecloth with slow, careful movements, the way she had handled every mess in that house for 3 decades. Emily was already smiling again, turning back toward the guests as if the moment had passed. Richard cleared his throat and continued talking about the landscaping project he wanted to start in the spring. Jason asked if there was more chicken. Megan reminded Linda that Sophie preferred her potatoes without gravy. The whole room returned to normal so quickly that Linda realized something painful. Her humiliation had only felt enormous to her. To everyone else, it was just another small inconvenience before dessert. She carried the stained napkin back into the kitchen and stood alone beside the sink. The sounds of silverware, laughter, and polite conversation floated behind her. The kitchen light hummed softly overhead. The oven timer showed 26 minutes left for the rolls she had promised to warm. On the counter sat the cherry pie she had made because Richard loved it, even though he had forgotten that peach pie was her favorite. Beside it was the anniversary card she had bought for him, still unsigned because she had been too busy making the evening beautiful for people who could not see her. Linda looked down at her blue apron. There were tiny spots of flour near the pocket, a smear of gravy at the edge, and a faint thread coming loose near the tie. She remembered buying it at a small store outside Cleveland years ago, when Emily was 8 and Jason was 12. Back then, the children used to run into the kitchen just to ask what smelled so good. Back then, Richard used to touch her shoulder when he passed and say, "You make this place feel like home." She wondered when home had become a workplace and when love had turned into a list of unpaid chores. From the dining room, Emily called, "Mom, can you bring out the salad before the main course gets cold?" Linda reached for the salad bowl, then stopped. Her hand hovered over the rim. For the first time all day, she asked herself what would happen if she did not pick it up. The answer should have frightened her. Instead, it made her breathe deeper. She turned off the oven. She placed the rolls on top of the stove. She covered the salad with plastic wrap and slid it into the refrigerator. Then she untied the apron slowly, folded it once, then again, smoothing the fabric with both hands. She took the grocery list pad from beside the refrigerator and wrote a single sentence in her neat, familiar handwriting. "Dinner is in the fridge. For once, serve yourselves." She placed the note on top of the folded apron on the kitchen island, exactly where someone would have to see it if they came looking for another favor. Her purse was hanging by the back door. Her beige cardigan was on the hook beside it. Linda put both on without rushing. She did not take the anniversary card. She did not take leftovers. She did not pack a suitcase. This was not an escape from responsibility. It was the first responsible thing she had done for herself in years. As she opened the back door, cool fall air touched her face. For a moment, she heard Emily call again, louder this time. "Mom?" Linda paused, one hand on the doorframe. The old Linda would have answered. The old Linda would have apologized for making everyone wait. But the woman standing in the doorway was done being useful at the cost of being invisible. She stepped outside, closed the door gently behind her, walked past the porch light and the trimmed hedges, and drove away while her family sat 20 feet away, still believing she would come back with the salad. By the time Emily found the note on the kitchen island, the guests had already begun to notice the strange delay between courses. At first, Emily tried to laugh it off. She said Linda was probably reorganizing something, because her mother could never leave anything alone. Richard stood in the kitchen doorway with his hands on his hips, staring at the folded apron as if it were a problem someone else should solve. Jason opened the refrigerator and found the covered salad, the foil-wrapped casserole, and the plates Linda had prepared in careful rows. "So what are we supposed to do now?" he asked, as if the food had become mysterious simply because Linda was not standing there to carry it. Emily snapped that they should just serve it themselves, but the words sounded wrong in her mouth. She did not know which platter went with the chicken. Richard did not know where Linda kept the serving forks. Megan tried to warm the rolls and burn the first batch because she forgot to lower the oven temperature. The guests became polite in that uncomfortable way people become when they are pretending not to witness a family embarrassment. Within 30 minutes, the perfect dinner had turned into a clumsy buffet of cold potatoes, uneven slices of chicken, and whispered questions no one answered. Richard called Linda 3 times. She did not pick up. Emily texted her mother, first with irritation, then with sharper irritation, then with a message that said, "This is not funny." No reply came. By the next morning, the house felt different, not messy enough to shock anyone, but off balance in 100 small ways. Coffee did not appear in Richard's mug. The dishwasher was full of clean plates, but no one emptied it, so dirty cups gathered in the sink. Jason came over to pick up the white shirt Linda had promised to iron, then complained when he found it still wrinkled in a laundry basket. Megan called from home asking where Linda kept the list of Sophie's food allergies for school snacks, because Linda was the only person who remembered every detail. Emily drove back to the house around noon, annoyed that her mother had turned one dramatic moment into an entire day. She expected to find Linda in the kitchen, quiet and apologetic, maybe pretending to wipe counters so she would not have to admit she had overreacted. But the kitchen was empty. The apron was still on the island. The note was still there. By Monday morning, small problems had become large enough for everyone to feel them. Richard forgot to take his blood pressure medication until almost noon because Linda usually placed the bottle beside his breakfast. Jason missed a dentist appointment for his son because Linda had always texted him reminders the night before. Megan was overwhelmed after watching the children all weekend without Linda quietly stepping in. Emily tried to make dinner and realized she did not know where her mother kept the roasting pan, the grocery coupons, or the little notebook where she tracked everyone's favorite meals. For years, Linda's work had been invisible because it was done before anyone had to ask. Now, every missing task left a mark. The laundry did not fold itself. The bills did not pay themselves. The refrigerator did not fill itself. The family calendar did not update itself. By the end of 48 hours, the Carter house had not fallen apart in some dramatic, noisy way. It had simply revealed the truth. Linda had not been helping the household run. Linda had been the reason it ran at all. On Monday evening, Emily stayed behind after Richard went upstairs to search again for Linda's medication schedule, and Jason drove home with another complaint he did not know how to solve. The house was quiet in a way Emily had never heard before. It was not peaceful. It felt abandoned by something warmer than a person, as if the walls themselves were waiting for Linda to return and make them feel alive again. Emily stood in the kitchen with a dish towel in her hand, staring at the sink full of plates from the dinner nobody had properly cleaned up. For the first time, she noticed how many small choices had always been made for her. The good sponge was near the faucet. The trash bags were under the sink. The extra dish soap was in the pantry behind the flour. Everything had a place because Linda had given it one. Emily opened the refrigerator and saw labeled containers stacked neatly from Saturday night, each one marked in Linda's handwriting. Chicken for Richard. Plain potatoes for Sophie. No onions for Jason. Extra salad for Emily. Even after walking away, Linda had left behind care in little plastic boxes. Emily closed the refrigerator slowly, and guilt pressed harder against her chest. She went upstairs to her mother's bedroom, telling herself she only needed to find the family calendar, but the room stopped her at the doorway. Linda's side of the bed was made perfectly. Her reading glasses sat beside a half-finished paperback. A pale blue sweater was folded over the chair, the same sweater Emily had once said made her mother look old. In the closet, behind a row of practical shoes and neatly hung cardigans, Emily found a small white storage box with a ribbon tied around it. She almost put it back. Then she saw her own name written on an envelope near the top. Inside the box were things Emily did not expect her mother to keep. Birthday cards from years when Emily had only signed her name quickly. Old school pictures with bent corners. A dried pink corsage from Emily's high school graduation. Receipts from grocery trips where Linda had bought decorations for parties Emily took credit for hosting. A printed email showing a payment Linda had made for Emily's car repair 2 years earlier, the one Emily thought Richard had handled. Beneath those papers was a small notebook with a soft brown cover. Emily opened it and saw lists at first, ordinary lists that became unbearable the longer she read. Richard doctor appointment, 8:30 in the morning. Jason kids pickup, 3:15 in the afternoon. Megan needs casserole after work. Emily interview blouse, dry cleaner by Friday. Anniversary dinner, make it beautiful, do not complain. Page after page, Linda had recorded an entire family's needs as if they were precious assignments. Then, near the middle, the list changed into short private sentences. I am tired today, but everyone seems happy, so maybe that is enough. Emily did not look at me when she said thank you, but she did say it. Richard forgot our anniversary again until I reminded him. I wonder if anyone would invite me to sit down if I stopped standing in the kitchen. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, the notebook trembling in her hands. The final line she read was written darker than the rest, as if Linda had pressed the pen hard into the paper. I do not want to be served. I only want to be seen. Emily covered her mouth, but there was no one in the room to hear the sound that came out of her. All the sharp comments she had tossed at her mother returned one by one. No longer small, no longer harmless, no longer easy to excuse. She remembered the grocery store roses, the side door, the gravy stain, the empty chair. For the first time, Emily understood that Linda had not vanished to punish them. She had left because staying had taught them to stop seeing her as human. Emily did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with Linda's notebook open in front of her, reading the same lines until the words blurred. By morning, the anger she had been holding on to had nowhere left to stand. Richard came downstairs expecting coffee that was not there, and Emily looked at him differently than she ever had before. For years, she had accepted his helplessness as ordinary, almost charming, the way everyone in the family joked that Dad could fix a porch light but could not find his own socks. Now it only looked like another weight Linda had carried. Jason arrived just after 9 with Megan and the children, complaining that nobody had answered his texts about school forms. Emily placed the brown notebook in the middle of the table and said, "We need to find Mom." Richard frowned, uncomfortable with the seriousness in her voice. Jason said Linda probably needed a little more time to cool off. Megan quietly picked up the notebook and read one page, then another, and her face changed. She did not defend herself. She only whispered, "I asked her to watch the kids every weekend." That was when Emily called Grace Miller, Linda's old friend from the school office, the one Linda still sent Christmas cards to even though the family rarely asked about her. Grace answered on the third ring. She was polite, but her voice had the steady firmness of someone who had been waiting for this call. "Yes," Grace said, "Linda is here." "No, I will not put her on the phone unless she wants to speak." Emily's throat tightened. "Please tell her I am sorry," she said. Grace was quiet for a moment. "You can tell her yourself, if you are coming to apologize and not to collect her." 2 hours later, the Carter family stood on the front porch of Grace's small brick house, 40 miles from Columbus, with a maple tree in the yard and a wind chime moving softly near the door. Linda opened the door herself. She wore jeans, a cream sweater, and no apron. Her hair was down around her shoulders, and for the first time in days, she looked rested enough to make everyone feel ashamed. Richard started first, because he was used to speaking for the family. He said they had all been worried, that the house felt strange without her, that things had gotten difficult. Linda listened without interrupting. Then Emily stepped forward, holding the notebook carefully against her chest. "Mom," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "I read it. I read what you wrote. I am so sorry." Linda's eyes moved to the notebook, then back to her daughter. Jason apologized next, awkwardly at first, then with more honesty as he admitted he had treated her help like something he was owed. Megan cried quietly and said she had used Linda's kindness because it made her own life easier. Richard looked down and finally said he had mistaken Linda's patience for contentment. For a moment, no one spoke. A car passed on the quiet street. Somewhere inside Grace's house, a kettle began to whistle. Emily reached for her mother's hand, but Linda did not take it yet. Her face was not cold, but it was no longer easy to move with guilt. "You all say you miss me," Linda said softly. "But I need to know what you miss. Do you miss me, or do you miss what I did for you?" The question landed harder than any accusation. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. Jason stared at the porch floor. Megan wiped her cheek. Emily looked at her mother and understood that begging was not the same as changing. "I miss you," Emily said, "and I know I have not acted like it." Linda's eyes filled, but she did not step aside. "I love all of you," she said, "but I am not coming back to be useful. I am not coming back to disappear in my own home." Richard nodded slowly, as if he was hearing his wife for the first time in years. Linda looked at each of them, then said the sentence Emily would never forget. "You do not miss me because dinner is late or laundry is piling up. You miss me because the woman who held your lives together finally stopped letting herself fall apart." Then Linda gently closed the door, not to punish them, but to give them the chance to prove that their regret could become something better than words. For 3 days after the visit to Grace Miller's house, Linda did not return home. She called once each evening, not to check whether dinner had been cooked or whether the laundry had been folded, but to ask how everyone was doing as people, not as a household that needed managing. At first, the Carter house struggled through the silence she left behind. Richard burned toast, misplaced his reading glasses, and almost asked Emily where Linda kept the coffee before catching himself and looking for it on his own. Jason came over after work and, instead of dropping his children off and leaving, stayed to help them with homework at the kitchen table. Megan brought groceries and admitted she had never noticed how many things Linda bought without being asked. Emily did the hardest work of all, She stopped pretending an apology was enough. She washed the tablecloth by hand, cleaned the kitchen from top to bottom, and placed Linda's anniversary card in the center of the dining table without opening it. Then she made a list, not of what Linda usually did, but of what each of them would do from now on. Richard would handle his own medication, appointments, and morning coffee. Jason and Megan would take care of their children without assuming Grandma was always available. Emily would come every Sunday, not to be served, but to share dinner and help prepare it. On the fourth evening, Linda came home just after sunset. She parked in the driveway and sat in her car for a full minute, looking at the house she had loved and resented in equal measure. The porch light was on, but this time it did not feel like a signal calling her back to work. When she stepped inside, nobody shouted requests from another room. Nobody asked where something was. Nobody handed her a problem. The house smelled of roasted chicken, warm rolls, and apple pie, but Linda was not the one who had cooked them. Emily stood near the stove wearing the blue apron, not as a joke, and not as a costume, but with quiet humility. Richard was washing dishes at the sink. Jason was setting cups on the table, while Megan helped the children fold napkins. Little Sophie ran to Linda first and wrapped her arms around her waist, saying, "Grandma, we saved you the best chair." Linda looked toward the dining room and saw it there, at the head of the table, not beside the kitchen doorway, not near the serving cart, not in the place where someone could easily ask her to get up. Her chair had a small vase of yellow roses in front of it. Grocery store roses, trimmed carefully and placed in clean water. Emily walked over slowly, her eyes already wet. "Mom," she said, "dinner is ready, and you do not have to serve any of it." Linda looked at her daughter for a long moment. There was still pain between them, but there was also something new, something built less from guilt than from effort. Richard dried his hands and said, "I should have thanked you every day, not only after you left." Jason nodded and added, "We are going to do better. Not for one night. For real," Megan said softly. "And we are going to ask before we assume." Linda took off her cardigan and placed it over the back of a chair. She did not rush to the kitchen. She did not check the oven. She did not correct the table setting, even though one fork was on the wrong side. She simply sat down. Emily served her first, hands trembling a little as she placed the plate in front of the woman she had spent years overlooking. For the first time in a long time, Linda ate while the food was still hot. Conversation moved gently around the table, not over her, not past her, but with her. Later, when the dishes were cleared by everyone except Linda, Emily found her mother standing by the kitchen island, touching the folded blue apron. "Do you want it back?" Emily asked. Linda smiled faintly. Not the way it was before. Then she placed the apron in a drawer instead of tying it around her waist. The house did not become perfect after that night, but it became honest. Linda still loved her family, but she no longer disappeared for them. And the Carters learned that a mother does not walk away because she stops caring. Sometimes, she walks away because the people she loves have forgotten that she needs to be cared for too.